Hello to my fellow internetizens. Welcome to the Pantheon live stream. My name is Steve Persh, and I'd like to begin this stream, like we do with so many of these live streams, with a question. If you are working on a website, I'm hearing an echo coming from somewhere. I don't know where that echo is coming from. That was weird. I'm going to power through the echo. Hopefully we'll figure out where it's looping from. I'm just going to keep going. All right. See, as I got started as a WordPress and then Drupal developer at the beginning of my career, I was not enthusiastic with the answers that came from those systems in the late 2000s that are still kind of the answers, the status quo answers now. You just got to know that there are certain folders like sites, default, modules, /custom, and that's where you put the custom stuff that is specific to the one site, and your shared stuff like your contrib modules goes somewhere else. And in WordPress, you're probably more reliant on naming conventions than on folders. And then in both Drupal and WordPress, themes are going to be their own story, and that's different from the core CMSs themselves. So it's a slightly or not so slightly different mechanism for adding, updating, and patching third-party code, depending on if that third-party code is a plugin, a module, a theme, the core CMS, or some other library or package. And maybe that's fine. Maybe it's fine in some cases for some teams, for some people, to keep track of the intricacies, the different ways you manage plugins versus themes versus core. Maybe that's just the cost of running a website, a little mental tax that you have to pay. But I don't want to pay that mental tax. I don't want to reserve the brain space for keeping track of those sorts of things. At Pantheon, we're pretty much built on the assumption that every year that goes by, the percentage of people who are uninterested or unwilling to pay that kind of mental tax, keeping track of those details, that percentage changes. I mean, let's keep in mind what this is all for. If you're a professional developer working in WordPress or Drupal, there's probably somebody paying you, probably by the hour, to get that website to do its job. Every professional website has a job to do. And if you get your website to do its job, which is going to require keeping the website up to date, you're going to have to remember to keep track of all those nuances of how to do the updates. But when I started at Pantheon as an employee almost 8 years ago, I thought it was instructive to see the difference of like the Pantheon way of updating Drupal and WordPress core compared to the community accepted norm. Back then, going onto Drupal.org, the official way, the documented way to update Drupal core had, I think, literally 12 steps. You downloaded the tar file of Drupal core. You untarred it with just the right mix of the command line flags. You did manual backups and on and on. And at Pantheon, we thought there's got to be a better way than that. So a decade ago, or a decade plus, Pantheon took those steps for updating core and simplified it down with Git and a button. If there's an update to core, you click the button, Pantheon updates under the hood. You keep moving. You keep doing your job of making your website better at doing its job. Well, a decade comes and goes, and the web development community has kept moving. For much of the website operations world, the status quo for doing these sorts of things is no longer manually juggling tar files. It's using package managers. NPM, the package manager of the JavaScript world, is probably the most well-known. In the PHP world, and therefore WordPress and Drupal, we have a package manager called Composer. The Drupal community standardized on Composer, perhaps reluctantly over the last decade, but since DrupalCon Denver in 2012, I was there in that core conversations room, it has been a one-way track towards Composer for Drupal. For the WordPress community, though, adoption of Composer has been a lot less clear. I hope that on today's live stream, though, we can alleviate some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Composer by showing how to do it. So going back to my first question, can we show a cleaner way of updating code that is not specific to our site, whether it's a WordPress core, a plugin, a theme or some other package. Joining me here to have that discussion, and I think I've figured out what my echo issue is. In some other tab, I must have opened the YouTube page for our live stream. So I'm going to hunt down that tab. And while I hunt down that tab, I'll also welcome in a former coworker of mine, now head of developer relations at Paladin Cloud, John Richards. John, go ahead and take a few or maybe more than a few seconds to introduce yourself. I will probably not hear you as I find that other noisy tab.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's great to be on here. I'm John Richards. I worked at Paladin, or I work at Paladin Cloud right now, but before this, I worked over at Pantheon. The fact that they both have a strong PA at the beginning means that I may swap them as I'm talking during this, so my apologies ahead of time if that happens. But I spent about a decade as a developer, and that led to really get involved in open source communities. And then the last 5 years, I've really been focused on building and growing open source communities. At Pantheon, I got to work with so many wonderful folks over in the WordPress side and the Drupal side. Just got to be back from DrupalCon US, which was wonderful, getting to talk to folks there. And obviously my roots, I started in WordPress, and organizing WordCamp US was pivotal for me and my shift into kind of being more involved in the community. So love the open source stuff. I'm at Paladin Cloud. We're an open source security as code kind of platform. So check us out on GitHub. Give us a star if you like it. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, for having me here today. Really excited to talk about WordPress, Composer, and of course, to be alongside our next, or not, I guess not guest, but the other person here today, Edmund.
Yes. Yeah, let's bring Edmund in here. I did find the noisy tab over in Firefox. I have the YouTube page for this live stream opened. Rookie mistake. I'll do better tab hygiene before the next live stream. Welcome, Edmund. Edmund Turbin calling in from across the pond, joining us from London. Edmund, so happy to have you here as well.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, John. So good to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you all tonight and just to see what we can do to modernize people's idea of WordPress development. I think that's one of the important goals that I have is really just to make it easier for people to do the things that they do, but also not complicate things that don't need it. So I think there's a really, we don't want to go too deep and overcomplicate things they don't need to be.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely not. And Edmund, part of the backstory of how this particular live stream topic came to be, I saw in one of our internal Slack channels, you sharing something like you're really interested in leveling up or professionalizing much more of the WordPress community's development practices. Could you share some of your own background with WordPress and your career and what has led you to thinking there are specific changes or advances that the broader WordPress community could be making and that they are worth making?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done development for more than 10 years. I started in Drupal and I did some side projects in WordPress, kind of flipped back and forth. When I came to London about 9 years back, it was a big change, and I found the first thing that I was able to do as a professional was some Drupal consulting, and that really set the tone for me. And I was able to really quickly do some work on teams, and I realized that there were ways that you could manage code that it was much easier to work in a team if you're doing certain things. And dependency management and using Composer was one of those critical things. So really, when I worked for an agency for a very limited period of time, and we were all just kind of cutting our teeth on how to use dependency management and using Composer. And I think some of those revelations really led me to think there is a good way that we could all work with the same system and the same plugins or modules if you're in Drupal. One of the things that's really inspiring for me is that this is a journey that I've been on for quite some time, is trying to do this on different platforms. It is something that we have in Pantheon. We have a integrated Composer workflow. So we're able to do this just straight on the platform. I think for Drupal, it's something that you just wouldn't think about, but for WordPress, it's not necessarily the first thing that the devs will go to. So yeah, wanted to go on.
Oh, go ahead, Edmund.
Just saying, I wanted to dive deeper and explore a little bit of how that composer can help with WordPress and workflow.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. And John, you mentioned that you were recently at DrupalCon North America. You gave a presentation that talked about the evolution of website deployments, and one of the central ideas that you talked about was software development cycles and the importance of team dynamics in shaping just how software development gets built and how we iterate upon our work, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when it was just me working on my own website and I was able to avoid a lot of other tools because it didn't matter if somebody messed it up. I knew who that person was. And then as that evolved into like working with other people and suddenly even not mistakes, but somebody's working on something and they're gone for the weekend and you're trying to figure out what happened there. And just this like rising complexity as we all had to be able to say, hey, we're supporting each other. And now instead of just all the code that I've written, I'm using a whole bunch of somebody else's code. And I'm bringing this in. I'm depending on this code, and now all of a sudden, maybe there's a security issue in that code, or there's some update, and if I don't know about it, now my code's vulnerable. So how do I keep that straight? And so like the overhead for developers to stay on top of all of this is like continually rising. I've been trying to find a word for this. The word I've been using. I asked AI because that's what you do nowadays, and they came up with this term of DevOps literacy, and I kind of like it. So talking about the skill of DevOps literacy and how it's like a complex language that's just growing is more and more stuff shifting left, adding more full stack engineering, and so I'm like, oh, this is really hard. And as a developer, you're like, I want to do a lot of developing. At least that's where I was when I was developing, and not skilling up a ton in this like DevOps literacy. So how do I do that? Well, you can offload that with something like Composer, having Pantheon handle a bunch of that. So I'm excited to see here what Edmund's going to show us.
Yeah, I think we should anchor on like let's make sure that we have a functioning WordPress site before we get too deep into the DevOps side of things.
That's a fair.
So let's bring in Edmund's screen share here, and I think one of the parts that I like about Pantheon is that within a few clicks you can get to a functioning WordPress site. And as we mentioned, Pantheon is built on a number of assumptions about professional best practices. One of which is like you should have Git as a foundation, an essential part of your development tool chain. But just to get off the ground, you can click and get to a functioning WordPress site and maybe not even appreciate the fact that Git is connected. We're aiming to do a similar thing with Composer. Can we click and get to a functioning WordPress site that happens to be using Composer, but just to like get to the functioning WordPress site and make sure that we are grounded in the reality of a functioning site? Let's see how that looks, and then we'll dive under the hood and see like, wait, how is this code even structured? So Edmund, could you first tell us what are we looking at here on this Pantheon docs page?
Yeah, sure. So this is the instructions for installing our Composer managed WordPress Upstream. So really how you can create a WordPress site that leverages Composer with a tool called Bedrock. Now, Bedrock was one of the first things that I looked at when I was trying to do things like dependency management, because it does put a bit of a discipline behind the way that you work with WordPress. It's not something that every platform will support. So in some systems, you will have to use different things. It's amazing that Pantheon has this Upstream and very quick way that you can create a site using Bedrock and allowing you to use a Composer managed site. So this is early access. It's something that is changing. It's something that we're actively working on, but it's actually very simple for you to go and create a site. So there's two ways to do it on the Pantheon platform. If you're command line savvy, you might use Terminus, which is a way to type in commands and actually run automated commands behind the scenes. But for our demo today, we're just going to create a site using this link here. So that will pop open the Pantheon dashboard. So I've logged in already. This is showing what the dashboard looks like. It takes you straight to the create site screen. And what I'll do is I'm going to change this to European Union. And let's say I'll call it let's say admin live stream. So all I'm doing here is using that Upstream and creating a site in the European Union. So I can go and continue. And behind the scenes, what that will do is start to deploy the site from the Upstream. It's going to build all the containerized infrastructure for you. And it will, in a few minutes, this will give you a WordPress site that you can work on that has Bedrock and allows you to leverage that Composer managed workflow. So in the spirit of not having to wait for things to load for too long, I have pre-populated a site and I've set that up. So, but if you were to go through that flow, you would see this line go all the way through. And at the end of this process, you would do the typical WordPress install. So name your site and set up your email. And really, it's something that happens in minutes. So that is what the
Edmund, could you jump over to those one of those other tabs where you have that pre-baked WordPress site and like let's just show nothing up our sleeves, so to speak. We just have what we're just going to end up with a pretty vanilla WordPress site in terms of like how someone interacting with the content of WordPress, someone interacting with the content of WordPress probably will have no idea that Composer is here under the hood. For many of the people on the team, like it's a WordPress site like any other. It just so happens that our code is in different folders and managed in different ways that we'll see in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and that's a great point. There isn't a plugin or a theme or anything that says that this is Composer installed here. It really is behind the scenes, and it is more of a dev tool. But this is the dashboard. You can see it's really just a typical WordPress site. Nothing too special there. In the dashboard, we've got a few plugins that are installed that they're actually managed by Composer that are added in already for you, just to take advantage of some of our platform functionality. But really, for the most part, this is just a typical WordPress site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've got a question coming in through the chat. Rita's asking, well, the most recent question is, so is there no way of taking an existing WordPress Upstream and converting it to a Composer managed site? My short answer would be, where there's a will, there's a way. You absolutely could do it. In practice, I would guess it might be simpler, more straightforward to make a new Pantheon site with this Upstream. Bring over your database, bring over your code, and cut over. But you certainly could take an existing site and change the Upstream and change the code structure and whatnot. Edmund, I imagine we could get into more of the details further on in the stream, but do you have any immediate thoughts or reactions to that idea?
No, it's right on. I think you can probably do it. You can take the Composer JSON file, which we'll look at a little bit later, and you could load up dependencies that are based on plugins or any other things that you have installed, like a theme. You could do that. It may be easier to create the site and then actually just bring the content in and set it up separately. But it depends.
And earlier we had a question about, are all Pantheon sites now using Composer? And no, as we saw over in that documentation, the particular Upstream that we're looking at right now is in an early access state. Although I should say, like, there have been Composer WordPress sites running on Pantheon for 5 years or more. My own personal website was WordPress plus Composer 5 years ago, and it it's worked fine. We're looking to just nail down and lock in some of these, some of the finer details of how the code is structured, and validate that it's meeting the expectations of the teams who want to use this Bedrock structure before we remove that early access designation.
Yeah, and the big game changer here too, from 5 years ago, was you could always run the Composer artifacts on Pantheon and be fine, because that's just WordPress at that point. It's that now you can offload the whole Composer processing onto Pantheon as well, which can lower that barrier of entry.
Ooh, John, you just said the word artifact, which I feel like is a great transition point to what I want to show next, diagramming out some of the underlying ideas here. So I wanted us to start here in the Pantheon dashboard and just show it's possible. Yes, within a few minutes, you can get to a functioning WordPress site that happens to be structured with Composer. All right. So we'll see here that there are potentially a lot of moving pieces in play with WordPress and Composer. But let's introduce them bit by bit. So we just saw Edmund. Edmund here, he's got a helmet because he's doing some serious heavy development work. We saw him in Pantheon. Click, click, click. And we got, we'll say this is our functioning WordPress site. This little block here is our functioning WordPress site. Now, one of the things we'll want to see shortly is how can Edmund work with that on his laptop? He was doing the clicking, instantiated it all on Pantheon, but of course, professional developers like to do a fair bit of stuff on their laptops. So we'll see in a few minutes Edmund working with the code on his laptop. Now, here's me. When I started at Pantheon a few years ago and saw this Composer wave coming, first for the Drupal community and the WordPress community to some degree, I thought there are a whole lot of interrelated problems, and perhaps we should address them all together. And that's what the Pantheon build tools suite of things was meant to do. So the interrelated problems I saw was the growing expectation that a developer, actually, John, I want to bring you in here because you did some of this work here too. The growing expectation that for the developers working on their laptop, they're going to push to a third-party Git repository, be it GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, and then, especially 7-ish, 8-ish years ago, as I was beginning at Pantheon, there was a growing expectation within the Drupal and WordPress community that everything goes through a pull request. I mean, that's a growing expectation for the whole software development world, that we push our code to GitHub or something like that, and then we're going to run unit tests, and we're going to lint, and we're going to do visual regression testing, and maybe some end-to-end testing, and we'll make a build artifact. That's the word that John said earlier. There's going to be a difference between the version of the code that we work with. Let's fill out some more Legos here. There's going to be a difference between the version of the code that we work with on our laptop. As we push, we're going to need to bring in our dependencies, going to bring in a heart, going to bring in other stuff, and this build artifact that has the other stuff on it is what actually runs on your live website. And my thinking, I think I wrote some verbose and opinionated Google Docs back in 2016 saying hey, Pantheon employees and Drupal and WordPress community, we got to address all of this stuff. We got to address all of this together because it's all interrelated, right? Guys, I'm not sure though if on this live stream we have enough time to discuss all of the there's a lot of boxes on here. Do we have time to discuss all of these boxes today?
We might need one live stream for each box. Well, that
all right. Yeah. Fair enough. 4 weeks ago we had, or 5 weeks ago we had Sean Dietrich from Canopy, and we talked about some of these boxes, and we really just had time for this box, a little bit of this box, a little bit of this box, but yeah, let's simplify way down. So for our live stream today, let's just ignore the question of an external Git repo and arbitrary build processes that could run unit tests and lints and visual regression. Let's just talk about how do we go from our regular WordPress, our WordPress code base, our bare WordPress code base that might need some plugins and themes attached to it in order to run as a functioning website? How do we go from here to here? Let's simplify, Edmund, if we can. All right. To do that, let's bring back your screen share. I feel we might have lost our board controller, Elsbeth. So I'll see if, or maybe she's there. I don't know. Let's bring. Oh, she must be there. She's doing something. All right, Edmund, I think we can hear you.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Very good.
All
right.
So let's talk about how do we get this this code that the code of this website that is functioning on Pantheon. How do we get that down to your laptop?
So what I did in this case is I was able to just take the code base and use a tool called Lando, which allows you to create a local site very quickly. I can show. All right, here we go. So in this file here, so this essentially is the code of my site that I pulled down. So I'm going to just show you the files in the terminal here, listing them out. So you can see that there is a Lando file here. Let's see. It is a dot file, so you will see it .lando.yml. So if I do code.lando.yml, this is actually linked to the Pantheon platform. So I did a command Lando init, and then I did a Lando pull and Lando start. That was able to bring down the entire code base, all the images, and also the database. So everything that I needed to start working on the site. And because I was using this Upstream, it also brings down the Composer files. So Composer uses two files. There's one called composer.json, and there's one called composer lock. So I'll talk about composer JSON and what the significance of these two files is. Really, what you're looking at here is a list of the repositories that I have linked to. So the things that all of my plugins will need to work. So you can see repositories there. You can see this one called Packagist, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You can see this one called Advanced Custom Fields, which some of you might recognize. But here where it says require, you can see that these are all WordPress plugins, and there's quite a few of them that say Roots. Now, Roots is the group that builds Bedrock, and some of the things that they do, you can see this WP password bcrypt. What that actually is a password plugin. So there are some things that Roots do with Bedrock, which enhances WordPress in different ways. So there's things like .env, so you can use environment variables. You can use, it restructures the way that WordPress's directories are. So it really does give you a way to manage WordPress core as a dependency as well. So it's not just adding plugins and adding themes. So from there, so this file is that there's a command called composer install, which will actually generate a file called composer lock. But it takes all of the things that are listed here, and it will install them into this vendor directory. So everything that is included here is actually been added to the vendor directory through the Composer installation process. Anytime that I want to add something to Composer, I can do that through this file or by running a command there. I think, Steve, this is kind of an important point as well to know, is that the files here in vendor are actually ignored. So you're not going to add this to your repository. So all of these dependencies are kept separate from your code base. And that's really, really important, because that means that you're not adding other files that are not needed, that you don't manage. You don't own those, that code or have anything to do with it. You're just adding it so that you can have it in your site. And that really fits in very well with WordPress, where there's many different plugins that you'll just have and you'll use.
Yeah, and Edmund, could you open up that git ignore file to help illustrate that idea of git is ignoring certain
I can.
directories here? Yeah, so the
Vendors
subfolders
here
within web, the entire vendor folder. What we get here is clarity for the human beings. You know, there are a whole lot of computers involved, but I like the clarity that human beings get by knowing if there are folders that are ignored by Git. That tells me, you know, after I've run compose or install, after these have been downloaded, like, yes, they might be on my machine, but these are not things that I should be touching, because if I touch them and I modify them, Git isn't even going to know. Git is ignoring those changes. So that those aren't the areas that I should be touching and changing. And that clarity is not present in the alternative way of managing a WordPress site, where all files perhaps might be committed to your Git repository, and then Git itself, and therefore your coworkers who might just be reading the Git repo, don't instantly know the difference between code that is specific to this site and code that is just getting pulled in as a dependency.
Yeah.
All right. Can we illustrate some more of this with the adding of a plugin? How would we, if we wanted to add a common WordPress plugin to a site like this, what would we do?
Yeah, I will show you, and I will give you a little bit of background as well. So I mentioned that there are a couple of different repositories. There's this Packagist. So there is wPackagist and Packagist. And maybe if I flip to my browser, this will make a little bit more sense. So there is a PHP package repository called Packagist, and this is where all of the dependencies will come from. And actually, not all of them, some. But there's even an even more WordPress specific version of Packagist called WordPress Packagist, or wPackagist. And this is really a mirror of the WordPress plugin and theme repository, and will allow you to very quickly to take any of those plugins and add them to your site. So there is a slight difference in the way that you might add a plugin from Packagist versus from WordPress Packagist. I'll show you what that looks like. So I go back to my, not that way, that way. Perfect. If I go back to my code, I can show you what it looks like to require something. So I'll say, not there.
It looks like, yeah, there you
go. So I'm going to say Yoast. So this is actually a really interesting one. So if anyone's familiar with the Yoast plugin, you can add that through Packagist and wPackagist. But probably for most WordPress plugins, you'll add it through wPackagist. So I'll show you Yoast here, and I'll show you a different one. So I'm requiring that. And what it's done here is now we'll be able to see this line, Yoast WordPress SEO. So that's actually been added to the project. And then if I go back to my browser, I go into my local version of the site. I'm just going to refresh that. You can see Yoast SEO pop straight up. So, and that's just amazing because it's so quick, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I was about to say, let me play devil's advocate, but that's not the appropriate term here. Let me play old school WordPress advocate. How the heck is that easier, better, preferable to what I've done for 2 decades, which is go to the list of plugins, search the WordPress UI for adding plugins for Yoast SEO or whatever, and I click add. How is this better? How is this better, Edmund? This looks way more complicated.
Exactly. And in some ways it is. It's definitely a more tech solution to doing something that many people already do. But when I was talking about working with a team before, I think that that's where this really comes into play. If you look at the version numbers here, so what we've actually done is we've said install these plugins, but also make a list of the plugins that are installed. So in that sense, you can take that list and have the identical list of plugins installed on any other machine, whether it is a dev environment on a platform, a live site, or a local environment that your teammates are coding on. So it is a way to not only manage the plugins, but also make sure that everybody has the same versions. And that is a very important differentiation between this JSON file and the lock file.
Yeah, and let's illustrate that with a git diff, if you don't mind. Like, I think if you run a git diff right now, we'll see like a 1 or 2 line diff on the composer JSON file, but we'll see a lot more in the lock file. So yeah, the composer JSON file just like added that 1 line of Yoast.
You can see WordPress SEO.
Yeah. And then this lock file, like this is giving you exact hashes and exactly where to download this stuff from. And
that's right.
That's what then enables Pantheon's integrated composer feature or your arbitrary third-party CI tool to download exactly what Edmund had on his machine when he added this and checked that it worked.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that there's a lot of other things besides just the plugin. Just because you're installing one plugin doesn't mean that the plugin doesn't need other things. So that there's this whole longer list of dependencies that what you're installing might actually require. So, and that's kind of a taste of what's in this composer lock file. And the command that I ran, composer require, actually does update the composer JSON file, but it generates this composer lock file, which has a lot more of those. You can see that there's just much more here. It's much more in depth.
All right, guys, I want to bounce off of you a hot take that just popped into my head. This is not part of our outline, but I said previously that the Drupal community has, although it's taken a decade and some reluctance and pain, the Drupal community has adopted Composer as the way for modern Drupal. WordPress, it is not quite so clear. My hot take here for why is the Drupal community already had the concept of stacking dependencies, like already had the concept of this module requires this module requires this module. So like if, for instance, in Drupal land, installing Pantheon's search module is then going to require another module, which is going to require another module. That concept of layers of dependencies formalized was already there. WordPress doesn't have that formalized concept. Like there's, the whole ecosystem of WooCommerce plugins. So like there are dependencies per se, but they're not formalized in the same way. Am I grasping at straw, or is there a there as to why this tool has been adopted differently by 2 different but not so different communities?
Yeah, I just think it comes down to it's different approaches, and I think there's so many types of developers in WordPress. There's just a range of people and abilities. And it's also, there's just not one way of doing things. So I think people are they're happy with what they know, and if that works, then it's great.
Makes
WordPress
sense.
just loves its backward compatibility. Look at how long the Gutenberg I forget the name of it, but the keep the classic editor plugin, it's long past its original lifespan, but it keeps getting extended because it's still not surprising to hit a site that's not using the new page builder, because there is this a lot of legacy there. But to your point here, I've been a part of rolling out a plugin that had embedded plugins in it, which meant then we had to manually track anytime all of that happened until we started to move over to a composer environment, because you would be like, oh, I depend on these 3 things, and then now I need to update them, but I don't know it. It's inside of this. And so you do have this this kind of anti-practice that develops out of that, of plugins that have other plugins embedded in them, but they're now hard locked at a specific version, which can create security problems.
Edmund, we've seen the adding of a plugin via Composer require. Could you either show or at least speak to how we might update our plugins and WordPress core using Composer?
Sure. Yeah. So I think you can see we've added Yoast here. As far as the next part of this process. So what I can show is committing the changes that we've done to a repo and then actually pushing it up to the site that I have on Pantheon. Does that sound like a plan?
That'd be great. Let's see what happens with Pantheon's integrated Composer functionality when you commit changes to the Composer JSON and log file.
Yeah, great. So I'm just showing that there's two files that have changed here. You can see that Composer JSON and Composer lock have both changed. We've added Yoast, so I'll say adding them all. Adding Yoast is my message. And so we've added, and I'm pushing that. So that's pushed. Let us have a look at Pantheon and see how that is happening over there. So this is my live site on Pantheon. It's actually a dev site, but this is the site that's on the platform versus this is my local site in Lando. You can see it's same thing, but just the URL is different. You can see that this is not quite there yet. So what's happening in Pantheon is that there's a deploy process. So there's an operation that's happening that will run the integrated Composer behind the scenes. So now when I go to the Pantheon dashboard, you can see it's syncing the code on dev. So once that happens, it's actually running Composer in the background, taking the plugins. It's reading that Composer lock file and then installing the Yoast plugin and its dependencies. And then once that's there, we'll be able to use Yoast on our site, just as it was in the local environment. So you can see that this is a really smooth way to move things back and forth. And I'd say, you could use the old school way of installing the plugin and uploading it. That works, but I think that there's a good benefit as far as workflow to doing things this way. So you can see that that's actually been uploaded now. So
and we just got a question here from Josh. Is there a way to see the output of the Composer install command while it is deploying to Pantheon? I think the literal answer, Josh, is yes, you see it after it completes. I think if you click that view log.
View log, yeah.
Yes, we'll see.
Yeah. So this is giving us a build log of what's actually happened there in the process.
And Edmund, could you refresh this dashboard?
To see the plugin, yeah.
Sorry, the Pantheon dashboard. I think that commit we're seeing might be a previous commit.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
So there's the
there we go.
Commit.
Right. Yes, and you can see WordPress SEO, which is Yoast. Cool. Yeah. And then actually, so once we go to the dev site, you can see now, well, it might still be working in the background, but it does show up. So that is good on the dev site. You can see it's dev instead of Lando. So I think that's a really, really fun way to do things and actually move code around and manage it. And really all I did was type in one line of code and then commit that code and then push it up to the repository.
All right. And there's one, at least this time is flying by. I can't believe we're 44 minutes in already. I don't know if we're going to get to everything that I wanted to show, but I do at least want to show my pull request of horror. So I'll drop it in the chat for everyone. Pull request of horror. This is the pull request on a side project of mine from many years ago. Edmund, since you've got the screen share here, do you mind
should I unshare?
Opening up. Click over to click over to StreamYard and open up that that link that I just put in the chat, please.
Okay.
And Josh is also asking, when moving code between dev, test, live, does the build process run on each deploy, or does it just run on deploy to multi-dev/dev and simply do a copy from dev to test? I think I know the answer. Edmund, if you're more confident in the answer, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry,
that's
missed the whole thing. I was trying to get the link up, but I was not doing that at all.
You keep going on the link. I'll answer Josh's question. Josh, to my understanding, is that the build artifact that's created by Pantheon's integrated composer feature is still deeply intertwined with Git, so that Git commit that Edmund just pushed has its own hash. That Git commit contained the composer.json and composer.lock change. My understanding of what's happening under the hood is that our integrated composer feature does the install and then associates the build artifact with that commit hash. And Pantheon for years has done deployments as deployments to dev and test as tags of Git commits that are on dev. So my understanding is that no, it does not have to redo the build process because there's already a build associated with the commit hash that's on dev.
And it might be a little dated. When I asked about this in the past, it actually creates two artifacts, because a cool thing about Composer is you can create special dependencies that only run in your dev environment. And usually this is like things that you're going to test with. You might have something that lets you be able to see all the queries that run on your WordPress site that would slow things down in production, might be an issue. And so you can have special testing dependencies still in there, and then it will put the one out on dev and then use the other part of the artifact without those as it deploys up to production.
All right, so what we have here, my go-to pull request for talking about Composer. I mean, if you could click on that files changed. This was a pull request that I did on a Drupal 8 project in the early days of Composer. And all this pull request was meant to do, although there's 79 commits there somehow, I think that was a Git history screw up on my part. This pull request was just adding address module. So this pull request should have been as simple as the Git diff we were seeing from Edmund earlier of like, there's a composer JSON file change, a composer lock file change, but I was not Git ignoring everything previously. I was committing everything to the repo. And so I ended up with a pull request that's just adding address module, but it adds 2,500 files because that's just how many files come along for the ride, get downloaded back in 2016 when you add address module and all of address module's dependencies and the dependencies of the dependencies of the dependencies. It was a long chain of dependencies, still is a long chain of dependencies to do addressing of real world places.
Where was that? Where can I click on to show that, Steve?
Oh, you are showing it?
No, I'm not. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not able to find it.
Oh, Els is showing it.
Oh, okay.
Els is showing it. Thank you, Els.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, it definitely wasn't showing for me.
All right, fair enough. We found it. We made it work. Thank you, Elspeth. Behind the scenes.
Magic. The magic behind the show.
At Pantheon, we exist to put the magic of the internet in everyone's hands. Elspeth just did some live streaming magic for us. All right. We are running out of time. I want to try and Lego summarize what I think we saw. So this world of dependency management can get very complicated, as we have seen in past live streams. This flow from code going from Edmund or anyone's laptop to a live or a dev environment website on Pantheon can be very complicated and go through lots of complicated build processes. But what we can simplify down to is we have our skeletal WordPress code base. We need to add things like, Yoast SEO. Who doesn't love Yoast SEO? It's a near requirement for any WordPress site. We're gonna need to add a few other things to our WordPress site. And rather than committing that on the laptop, committing it to the Git history, we can now expect Pantheon to download all of those dependencies for us. All right. I mean, this may be the most dependencies I can wait, there we go. We've got 4 dependencies squeezed on, and now we're running our full WordPress site here in Pantheon somewhere. Oh, I've got my cell phone. I can browse the internet. I can see that website here. We're good to go. John, Edmund, thanks so much for joining us on the Pantheon live stream. Any other details or closing thoughts you guys want to get in?
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. And I got to say, I love the crayons and Lego. So it's a blast to be a part of the show.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Steve. This has been really fun. So enjoyed it, and nice to be able to show off some Composer stuff.
Great. And for those watching on the live stream live or recorded after the fact, if you want to try out anything that you just saw, evaluate whether or not it makes sense for you and your team, you can do so for free. What you've seen here, you can replicate with a Pantheon sandbox. Go to this docs page, follow along. You can get that fresh install of WordPress using a Composer-based code structure within a few clicks, as we saw. Follow along with the docs, add a plugin, decide if this is right for you. And if so, keep rolling with it. And if not, well, perhaps another time. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you online.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.